Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. We are sitting here today with Dr. Kyle Elliott. Kyle is a tech career coach, job search expert, mental health advocate, and proud Disneyland Magic Key holder who began on Fiverr reviewing resumes, ultimately becoming a trusted advisor to top Silicon Valley executives. Drawing on his advanced training in counseling, trauma informed coaching, and storytelling, he's been featured in major outlets like Forbes and Harvard Business Review, empowering senior managers to own their fabulousness and achieve what they never thought possible. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And we're excited to have you here. There's lots of interesting topics that we're going to be diving into. Before we get to that, though, we do like to have an icebreaker on this show. And the question for you today is, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most and why?
I love this. For those who are watching on video, I have Stitch over here. I love Stitch. I think he's lovely. I think he's funny, humorous. And then on the inside, he has this just sweet personality. By far, he's my favorite character.
I love that one, Stitch. I like that one.
I think there's a big resurrection of him too. We go to Disneyland a lot and they've been putting more and more stuffed animals of him, t-shirts. I feel like a lot of people can relate to him. He's a little misunderstood. And then as you get to know him, a lot of people have this love for him.
Makes me wonder if there's like a live action. This seems to be the running theme at Disney now, right? Live action. So maybe they're going to do a live action Stitch.
I believe they are. I don't know if it was like AI. Now it's hard to know what's real or not, but I saw this video where they were showing, I think, kind of like the movie Ted. I think a Stitch kind of movie like that is going to be coming out, I think this year or 2026. It's supposed to be coming out.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll have to go look that up.
Do not quote me, but it should be coming out. So I'm excited.
It sounds exciting for sure. Let's slide into it now. So, what does procrastination mean to you? How would you define it?
Putting things off. I'm a career coach, so a lot of people I work with, it's putting things off, waiting to do something, saying, oh, I'm not sure if I really want to do that. For me, it often, at least used to be a lot with working out. It was like, oh, I don't know if I really want to do this. I don't know if I want to go sweat. I don't know if I want to go move my body. So that's what I think of when I think of procrastination, this uncertainty about moving forward and doing something.
Thank you for sharing that. What we all know that there's no like one size fits all or one cure all, silver bullet, whatever your favorite term is for getting over procrastination. But what's been your secret sauce to getting over procrastination?
A few things. The biggest is reconnecting with your why. Why is this important? So for me, for working out, it was my mental health. Let me reconnect with my mental health, have a way to disconnect from the busyness of my work, focus on myself, have more energy, sleep better. Now I've been working out consistently, doing Pilates for 14 months now. So that helped reconnecting with the why. And then I'm a big systems person. So having a system, like signing up for a class, knowing that if I don't cancel 8 hours before, they're going to charge me $10, having that community, knowing that, okay, it's at 4:30, so I need to finish work at 4. So really reconnecting with the why. And then for me, it's a lot about systems. I work with a lot with tech people who are very type A often, and I am as well. So having those systems and practices in place have been really invaluable.
No, I like what you said there. Reconnecting with your why. It reminds me of that saying. It's not mine. I have no idea who to credit it with, but the first time I heard it, it was actually in a work seminar. It was when your why is high, your cost is low. So I really like that one.
I love that.
Yeah, it's not mine, unfortunately. I'd love to take credit for that.
I love that though. It's so much easier when you know that why. It makes it a lot easier to get out of bed in the morning, to go work out, I work with job seekers to submit those applications or prep for an interview. When you really have that motivation clear, it helps a lot.
Well, it does. Actually, I wanted to touch on that with you specifically because you were talking about the careers and we're talking about motivation and inspiration. There's actually three parts to this, so bear with me. This might seem a little bit daunting to get into. The first part I want to get into is just the differentiation for you. I want to hear your perspective on motivation versus inspiration. And I always talk to people about this because I've found it really interesting, and the camps are pretty divided. They're pretty even right now. But I've always thought of motivation as being that sort of, they say that's what drives you through, right? But I've always found it to be more fear based when you use that.
Mm.
And when you go for inspiration, it's shorter lived, which really shouldn't be, because inspiration for me is coming from a place of joy or expansion or, and what's your take on those two?
Such a good question. I've never thought about the difference, to be honest. I think I've used them as synonyms most often, or really not thought of the difference. My therapist, recently we were talking about the difference between meaning and purpose. And I was like, well, I haven't really gotten into the difference. So with motivation, inspiration, I can see kind of what you're talking about around, about more of the negativity around motivation, the positivity about inspiration. As I noodle more, what comes up for me for inspiration is like that creativity or that inner thing that drives you. And then motivation is kind of that external pressure that comes out. And I don't know if that's just my own bias, but that's what immediately comes up. Is there external motivations or pressures? And then how do you find that internal inspiration to drive you to move forward?
For not having something prepared there, that sounds pretty on point. It sounds like a really interesting point of view and very valid. Thank you for sharing that. And just going into that again, motivating or inspiring people to get to do their job search. I know right now, like even personally, there's so much uncertainty and fear in the market right now, and because I've got inside information and I'm actually on the edge of this one because there are certain job I used to work with certain freelancing platforms. Um, so I've seen the numbers more than other people have probably, but AI is this big, humongous sort of uncertain question mark, right? We don't know what the future is going to bring, but we do know that since 2016, 87% of basic jobs that used to be on Fiverr and Upwork, which were related to content writing, SEO, ad campaign management, have all disappeared. So I guess one of the questions I have for you is have you experienced that, with your own clients, that sort of kind of like, oh, what's the point? Why am I getting this job if it's going to be replaced?
Sometimes I like figuring out kind of why are they procrastinating, what's causing them. Usually I work with senior managers and executives, so sometimes they worry about the elimination of jobs or their direct reports jobs. Oftentimes there's something else happening there as well. I think of it like an iceberg. Maybe the top 10 or 20% they're aware of, and they think it's maybe because AI or this fear, or maybe imposter syndrome they call it or something. I like saying, what's the 80 or 90% below the surface, underneath the water or the iceberg that you're not looking at that might be really causing the procrastination? Maybe those things that are subconscious or unconscious that you're not aware of. Because oftentimes people just focus on those easy kind of headlines. Ooh, AI is taking your job. Okay, I'm going to procrastinate. Okay, great. But does that really apply to you? Or what's really driving your procrastination? So then we can start. I think of it like a diagnosis. We need to know what's actually causing your issue, so then we're not like, oh, you have a stomach ache, let's give you Tums. But if you're bleeding out, like Tums isn't going to fix you bleeding out.
I like that. And it's interesting though when you say, the upper management, as you get higher up, and that goes back to what you said before about purpose and meaning. I know I hit this point myself when I hit, director of, trust and safety or whatever title that was back then. But normally what happens is that level is you hit kind of what you see you can do, and then you just kind of keep the company running. But then this kind of boredom, I guess, sets in.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you've noticed a lot, or is that just me?
No, it happens. A lot of people say, okay, what's the purpose? What's the meaning of this job? Why am I doing this? Oftentimes, clients at kind of like 18 months in a role, 2 years in a role, they say, okay, what now? Like, why am I doing this? What's the reason? And like we said earlier, it could be, is that motivation driving you? Is it something negative or external? Is there internal motivation or inspiration? Something positive? Like, what is driving this? And I often ask people, are you like running away from this current job? Are you running towards something? Us uncovering beyond just what's on the surface here, if you're procrastinating or if you're not wanting to move forward, or is there something deeper here going on that we have to uncover?
And with the people you've worked with, has there been any kind of common ground at all?
One of the most common is confidence. It comes up a lot. People feeling inconfident in their ability to go target something new. They're like, ooh, I want to target my first director role, my first VP role, my first C-suite role. I don't know if I'm qualified to do that. So then sometimes they procrastinate because they're like, ooh, if I don't go apply for the role, I can't get an interview. Then I can't go fail. So let me just stay here. Other times people are just comfortable. Like they're comfortable in the role. And my therapist calls it like the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Like the effort and the energy of going and applying for roles, putting yourself out there, facing possible rejection isn't worth kind of putting all that effort in. So it's like, oh, I'm just going to stay here. I called it like your cave person. Like, okay, I'm just going to stay in this warm cave. It's human nature. Instead, let me go out there and maybe get attacked by a bear. Yes, I might find berries, or I might get attacked by a bear, and I don't know if it's worth it when I'm just going to stay in my warm cave instead.
You said something interesting there too about having a new role or applying for a new role and the fear of rejection. I've noticed a trend, through the various job sites like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, I think Monster was one of them, Indeed. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot of complaints about or seeing a lot of complaints about is not even rejections, it's ghosting.
Either today or yesterday, I posted an article about ghost jobs and this ghost jobs, and then just never hearing back. There's this podcast that talks about it, this ambiguous loss. It happens when someone's lost at sea, or there's a flight that goes missing. You have this like uncertainty. There's a lack of closure that happens, and it's really frustrating for job seekers. They send an application out, they spent all this time, and then it's like, what happened? There's no closure. And then it's like this thing that can keep going on in your mind and can be really frustrating and unsettling. And then you get no feedback, so you don't know what's going on. And it can be overwhelming.
And what do you say to people that have that frustration and they're stuck in that loop of closure because realistically they may never hear back, so that they have to find a way to be okay with that. Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, one of my biggest suggestions is I say, okay, we're on this screen, you and I, what's within our control here? And then 90% of the time they say, then I want them to get back to me. I say, no, what's within our control here? That's going to give you some sort of comfort, contentment, feeling okay with this, and finding something that's within our control instead of relying on someone else for that closure, for feeling okay with this, what's within our control. And that can be really powerful to self-soothe yourself and find something that works instead of allowing some other person who may never get back to you to control how you're feeling. And that takes time and practice, but it can be powerful to say, here's what's within my control, instead of allowing someone else to dictate your feelings and emotions.
Wow, that one is really really difficult because I don't think I've mastered that yet. I mean, what was the saying that they always just say? Like, nobody can make you feel anything unless you let.
And it's easy to say that. Something I find helpful is a simple tea table. I work with a lot of tech executives, so I have them get a tea table and I'll be like, okay, on one side, we're going to say everything's outside your control. Like if people get back to you, all these things. And then what's within our control that's possible? Let's try. We can honor and acknowledge everything on that one side that's outside your control. We can be annoyed. We can cuss, yell, cry, whatever. And then, okay, once we process that or manage those feelings, now let's focus on what we can actually do about it that's going to be helpful for you.
And just in general, what are some things that they can do to, I don't even know how to put it, to be more visible, to be more valuable? What are we even looking at here?
I think there's two things. I think one, it's like the self-care for yourself. Like that's a cruddy situation to be in. So do you have community around you? Or are you practicing mindfulness or meditation? What are you doing to take care of yourself? And then there's like the application process. Are you following up on applications you've sent? Are you tailoring your resume? What are you doing job search wise to increase that conversion rate? I think of it kind of like if you were doing a marketing campaign, you could kind of sit there and say, no one's coming into my store or coming to my website. Or you can think of it like a marketing funnel and say, what can I control or change to improve this marketing funnel and drive more people through?
I think you said something interesting there when it comes to the job search itself and just trying to find different positions. We are in an era where I know personally, I've never really done this myself, is followed up on job application. I've always just kind of left it. I don't know why. I guess it was kind of always in my mind that, well, nobody ever really told me you're supposed to do that. Is that a common practice that we're just not doing because we just don't know to do it?
I think it's that common. I think people are afraid. I think part of it's that rejection. What if they do get back to me? I think people with AI or all of this automation with A lot of factors. They say, let me just apply to a bunch and increase my chances. But people are really more successful, I find, when they do reach out and follow up. I've hired for roles, and then I've had clients. A lot of my clients are executives hiring for roles. And like, I got 400 applications overnight, Kyle. It's impossible to go through those sometimes. So when they have people follow up with them, they're going to take a second look at your resume. It doesn't mean you're going to get an interview. If you're getting more eyes on your resume, it can really improve those chances. I encourage people, especially if you're a procrastinator or you struggle with time management, is get a timer and set it for 20 minutes. Like, hey, I'm going to apply for a job now. Let me spend 20 minutes reaching out to people at that company. I like 20 minutes because it gives you enough time to kind of reach out to people, but then you're not spending 5 hours doing it on a single company that may not get back to you.
No, yeah, the following up, and then that's a good idea too. Reaching out to other people at the company. I don't think that's something else that many of us do. But then again, we live in different times, right? Before I started working online, which is before COVID made it cool. Too soon for the joke?
No, I think it's true.
But I started working at home basically back in 2012. I remember that it was, submit a resume to maybe 30 places, maybe get an interview with 5, and then, maybe get a final interview with 2, and then maybe get 1 out of those. Now it's more like submit, 400, maybe get, 2 people to call you back, maybe get an interview out of that. Is there anything we can do to stand out? I mean, I know in back in the day, I'm dating myself. People used to say, "Oh, well, nick the side of your resume, or use colored paper, or is there anything digitally that we can do with that?"
I love what you just said, even nick the side of your resume, use color paper. It's really about, I think of it optimizing. I encourage people, most people are familiar with like a really basic marketing funnel. You have to like get clear on your target market, then say, okay, who aligns with this? Then let me reach out. And then with a marketing campaign, you would usually follow up. So I would do the same with your job search. I would actually write out each step in your job search and then go through and say, what can I do to optimize each of these steps? And I can give some tips, but for each person, it's going to be different too. Because let's say you live in Canada, you know a lot of people in Canada, your techniques might be different than someone who maybe lives in SF and has a bunch of friends who works at these companies. But what I would suggest is going through each stage at the beginning of the funnel, for example, saying, hey, am I targeting the right companies? Where if they get 250 applicants, I'm going to be one of the 5 they interview or one of the 10. And if I don't feel pretty confident about that, I need to change what I'm targeting. I don't want to waste my energy there. Then next with my resume, am I making it really easy for them to say yes? Am I using that language? Again, I would use a timer and spend 20 minutes customizing your resume for each job you apply to using their language. And then for the follow-up, are you again spending 20 minutes or so following up on your application? And just go through each step of the funnel and see where you might be able to optimize it a bit. And if you increase each of those by 5, 10, 20%, a lot more of those resumes and applications would move through the whole funnel.
You mentioned something interesting there too about, targeting the right companies. And again, I've been guilty of this before. Really, do you think it makes a difference if our core values are 100% aligned with the companies that we're applying to, rather than just going for the highest, sorting the job list by the highest paying and just, applying like that?
I encourage people to make a list of what's important to them. Some of my clients, it's definitely money. I've had clients who say, you know what, Kyle, I don't care what you have me doing. It's money. That's all that matters. Other people, it's less money. It's maybe, am I able to work remotely or hybrid? Am I doing meaningful work? Am I able to spend time with my kids? So I would make a list of what's important to you and then allow that to guide your search. But then an extra layer people forget sometimes, and we have to have a reality check, is what is the market saying? Like, how well do you align with these roles? And knowing it's a competitive job market, it's not what it was 5 or 10 years ago. Like, are you qualified for these roles? And if you were the hiring manager, would you interview someone with your skill set, background, experience, education? And it's okay to make a leap and make a pivot. But let's say you've never worked in tech, maybe going for Meta or Google or Amazon's a jump. Can you maybe start with a less well-known tech company. And then once you have tech on your resume, then go for these bigger ones and just be realistic.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Just going back to that purpose and knowing that it kind of aligns with you. I mean, yes, some people are motivated by money. I get it. No judgment. I mean, everybody's got their reasons. But do you find that there's a difference when people do that when they're applying? Do you find that it turns from, say, something that is kind of boring into something that's more exciting because either the money's aligned or maybe the position's aligned and they have more energy, therefore they're not as frustrated by doing as many?
Yes, I find when people have a really clear reason, there's something driving them or pushing them, it helps a lot. And it might be money that then is going to pay for their kids' college, or maybe they need to make their mortgage. Usually, when there's something really driving them, there's a fire under them, it's easier to do that work. When there's less of a fire and they're like, oh, I'm kind of content in my job, maybe I'll look, maybe I'm not, it's a lot more difficult to do resume writing. And except me, a lot of people don't like writing resumes and working and reviewing them or applying for jobs or interviewing. So those difficult tasks are a lot more challenging when you don't know your values, what's driving you, your meaning and purpose.
No, you're absolutely right there. You touched on another sort of facet there as well, and it was, you know, we should have up to date resumes, but how how often should we be updating our resumes? Like, especially when we're in a job, because they say that the best time to look for a job is when you're in a job. So how often should we be updating?
It depends on the person. Everyone's work style is different, but I'd suggest creating some sort of practice that works for you. One of my clients, every Friday on their subway ride home, they just write down their accomplishments. So they constantly have a list going. And then every so often, they update their resume. Other people, it's every month or every quarter. I would see if there's something you already do. Maybe you have a skip level meeting. So you meet with your boss's boss every month or every other month and you update them. That could be a great time to update your resume. Or maybe your company has QBRs or quarterly business reviews. I would find some sort of task you already do at work, maybe where your accomplishments are already written down, so it's less effort. And then just use that to update your resume. So then it's not some huge lift. Because I've had clients who say, Kyle, it's been 23 years at the same company. Here's my resume from 98 in my MBA program. Like, it's a lot easier if you're updating it over time and find some sort of cadence that's easier to follow.
And no, well, okay, so updating pretty frequently, but how important are keywords and updating your resume per job application? Because I remember somebody told me that you really should be putting in a different resume for every job application, which really didn't make sense to me at the time. Is that
I would suggest customizing it for each role. However, when people think customization, they think they have to rewrite their whole resume. And that's why I like instead maybe spending 20 minutes. Because if I'm a hiring manager and I'm going through a bunch of resumes, and maybe you've applied for a company that does B2B marketing, and then one that does B2C, business to business or business to customer or business to consumer, and you have both on your resume, if I'm only hiring for one of those two, I'm going to be like, wait, all of this is irrelevant. It's kind of like cooking. Like if you're cooking a cake and then you bring out bacon, you're like, oh, why is this bacon on the counter? I don't need it. So the same with your resume. I would go through and tailor it for each role. But I think it can be easy. I would go through, do it like Mad Libs, where you have spots where you can automatically add in some language or change it, depending on each role. Have a master one. And one of my favorite spots to do it is at the beginning of each bullet, just adding a keyword that you can change for each job. Maybe one job is a project management job. So the first bullet says project management in all caps and bold, and then you have a colon and the keyword. And then as people see this, you're like, oh, this is really easy for me to understand how your experience is relevant. And then as a bonus, you've added those keywords in, so it's easier for them to find you in the applicant tracking system.
no? I like that. I know that just flipping on the other side of it, actually having to hire people must be more of a nightmare now as well. So, what do you think is more important for hiring managers now? Is it a big list of skills, or is it proven applications of the skills?
I think it's both. They want to know you have the skills. How can they find it on there? But then they need the experience. With AI right now and people automating their job search, a lot of people just throw a list of 50 skills on the bottom of their resume. And for hiring managers, they can see through that. So they don't want to just see these skills. They need to find those skills And they need to see application. Have you actually done this? And in this job market, it's not enough to just throw a skill on your resume. They want to know, okay, have you actually done this? And the person who spends a little bit of time connecting the dots for that recruiter or their hiring manager, they're going to get the interview over someone who just has a list of 50 skills, but then the rest of their resume doesn't really connect the dots or relate to that skill list.
And just extending on that a little bit, I know back in the day, back when Google first came out, everybody was like, oh, yeah. And then everybody Googles you before you get a job. So, how important would you say it is to have relevant, because somebody else told me this, you should get your first name, last name.com if it's available. You should put your resume on there. You should have your socials up to date. You should have just to prove you're a person, I guess. Is that as important as the resume?
I think they serve different purposes. I think LinkedIn's really key. I forgot the stat, but it's a high number percentage or a high number of people who are going to look at you on LinkedIn and find you. I would make it easy and put your LinkedIn URL in your resume, make it easy for them to click through and find you. You could even reach out again to them and then prove you're a human and reach out initially. So then they're landing on the right LinkedIn profile. They're looking there. That's what I would suggest. I love the idea of a website. I think for some people, it might be too much work and then people can kind of over optimize their website, but I would at least make sure your LinkedIn's updated and accurately reflects your skills and experience.
Right. So, having your updated resume, maybe making sure that your LinkedIn is there because, it's kind of your like this online thing. But that was something else too that causes a little procrastination when it comes to applying for jobs because, and again, I've been in a position where I've done this personally once. I've seen, oh yeah, this might be a good job for me to, and this was someone who told me about the position. I go to LinkedIn, I click on it. Oh, it's not easy to apply.
Mm-hmm.
It's not happening.
I would figure out what motivates you. I encourage people, I think about like a toolbox. Do you have like a motivation or inspiration toolbox you can pull into? One of them might be like reconnecting with your why. For me, for example, like one of my whys is I love traveling. I like having fun. I love Disneyland. So I have quite a few little knickknacks around my office to be like, okay, there's a little thing from like Costa Rica. Okay, that's going to remind me like part of the reason I'm doing this thing that's maybe annoying or an administrative task I don't like is so I can go to Costa Rica. Okay, what's next in my toolbox? If that doesn't work, do I have an accountability partner? Okay, if that doesn't work, let me set a timer and then I'm going to reward myself and go walk to Starbucks. Everyone's going to be different. Some people have certain rewards more than others. Like I'm not a gift person. I don't like gifts. My partner, a gift will reward him. The smallest gift will make him excited. So that could be something in your kind of anti-procrastination or your motivation and inspiration toolbox. If here's 4 or 5 things when I have a task that could motivate me.
I love that the way that you say that, that these annoying things or I like to go into the boring side of things, right?
Mm,
And because a lot of the times it's boring. Now I like touching on boring and I want to hear your talk on this. I mean, do you have clients that come to you and say that, they're super bored in their work and what's your take?
yes, there are people who are bored, and I like figuring out like what is this? What does boring mean to you? What is that actual feeling or emotion that's going on? I know for me, sometimes it's just like a lack of enjoyment. It doesn't excite me. I love coaching clients. At the end of each day, I send them my notes and I do not like it. It is boring. So for me, I have to use a reward. Like when I send my notes, I'm allowed to watch Judge Judy or her new show, Judy Justice. So that's like my reward to get me through. Very creative name, Judy Justice, but gets me through kind of sending those notes and I get that reward. I like figuring out, is there something underneath it? For me, it's just like, it's not fun. I don't like it. It's pretty simple. It's boring. Like, there's not really much underneath there. I've tried exploring it. Other times, there might be something underneath that boring. Like, do you feel like there's some greater purpose you want to live? Is it a lack of confidence? What is it that's causing this boredom can be interesting for people to explore. And sometimes it's just not a fun task, like doing your taxes. Some people like that. I have an accountant, he loves it. But for a lot of people, it's just a task that's not fun.
Something that I use on my daughter all the time. She's probably gonna hate that I bring her up in the podcast, but and she always comes to me and she says, "Well, this is super boring. I don't want to do this." Well, one, you got to do the work so that you can go out. So there's sort of like some motivation because if you don't do it, you're gonna be back. But I always told her that, what are you missing? She's like, "Well, what do you mean?" It's like, "What are you missing?" Do you know absolutely everything there is to know about that class and that's why it's boring to you? Or are you just not interested in it? And what's interesting is that when you dig under boredom, it actually comes from one, we're an overstimulated world. Two, we are wired for the distractions. We are wired for the new things because, 10,000 years ago when we were running naked through the woods alone and afraid, every new thing that popped up could have killed us. So that's why, oh, yeah, we should probably pay attention to that.
Hmm.
But therefore, the brain got very good at, I know everything I need to know about that. It's not important. Therefore, it's boring. We'll move to something.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. Yeah, this overstimulation too. I think we're so used to that. If something isn't super stimulating, it could be difficult to pay attention.
Yeah, I like the boredom one, and I like the feeling burned out too. When they have too many things. But I wanted to touch again and just a little bit on overwhelm. You mentioned overwhelm.
Hmm.
How do you define that? Because I have two different definitions myself.
I think it depends on the person. Often when people come to me, they'll share that they're overwhelmed or feeling stuck. It can depend on the person and how they describe it. But usually there's so many things people feel like they have to do, or so many directions, or so many options. It could be a list of things, or it could be a list of options. Those are kind of two of the camps people are often in. And then a lack of kind of direction or a lack of compass. And sometimes they don't have a compass to direct them, or their compass is there, but then they feel like it's pointing in a lot of different directions.
No, I mean I like that the compass going too many ways or having too many things to do. I wanted to get your take on this one, especially as it relates to like jobs, especially upper management when it happens that people say they're overwhelmed. I've had it where I've had somebody come to me. They've sent me the sort of the surface level. Oh, I'm overwhelmed. Well, yeah, you've got 250 tasks. Delegate some of that or get rid of
Mhm.
it. But I've also had somebody come to me and say, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't get it. Well, let's write out what you have to do. It was three things. And what was interesting is that the three things they were trying to do on their list, it was not my circus, not my monkey. So it wasn't anything that they had control over or technically their responsibility.
Mm.
And they were trying to take that and they couldn't do it. So then it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it sounds like less of the actions and more of like the feelings and emotions that are overwhelming. And I would go back to that kind of square, like, okay, we're on this screen. I usually meet on this Zoom with people, like, what's in our control? And can we bring this in your control? If not, we need to focus on what's in your control, managing those emotions, managing those feelings. Maybe it's communicating a boundary with someone. I find once people start identifying that and taking that sense of own agency, that ownership, and I call it self-empowerment, self-empowering yourself, it's a lot easier than allowing someone else to dictate how you feel.
No, for sure. I mean, just the ownership and taking things back. We tend to feel like, even when, I have to versus I get to or I choose to.
Hmm.
And everything in life is a choice. People hate me for pointing this out, but
Hmm.
there's literally two things in life that aren't a choice. Everything else is a choice. It gets very controversial, as you can imagine, because, like I say, well, there's a gun to my head. I didn't have a choice. You did, but, you just chose based on potential consequences.
Yeah.
And so, that's where that comes from. But, I think that a lot of people today, especially, they just find it, and I'm not trying to put anyone down. Just sometimes you don't want to take responsibility for it. It's just easier to shuffle it off to someone.
Yeah. And that could be a form of procrastination. Like, am I going to shuffle that off to someone? Am I going to have them be responsible? It's easier to avoid. And that's a typical coping strategy of avoiding, and it's human. And I want to normalize that too. Like, that's what humans do. They're going to avoid it, ignore it. It's easier, it's scary. And it takes a lot of courage and confidence to approach something and say, okay, I'm going to take this on and deal with it.
What would you say is the biggest challenge in this whole process? Would it be the resume? Would it be getting the resume in front of somebody who reads it? Would it be researching or upskilling? What's the most challenging, would you say?
I would say it's the confidence with all of that. I think oftentimes the tactics are actually not that challenging. It's those stories that people are telling themselves. Am I not going to hear back? Do I put this word on here? What do I say in this message? Am I really qualified? All those other things underneath are actually a lot of what's holding people back. And once we start uncovering and addressing those, it's a lot of those underneath things. And probably like 90 something percent of what I deal with clients is like more of those confidence related issues that we start trying to cover.
That's interesting. I guess because it comes down to, are you doing those yourself or are you using a tool? Are you doing it the right way? Do it the wrong way? Just touching on tools a little bit. Do you recommend to you, because I've seen this, I've seen a lot of these now where people are complaining, like recruiters are complaining, but also people are complaining that, they go to apply to a job and there's like 1,000 applicants or whatever, and they're all generated by AI and they're all the same.
Mhm.
Is it acceptable, do you think, to use AI to, write your resume and make applications?
I think it can help you. I think it can be a tool. I think of it kind of like spell check in Microsoft Word. It's not doing the work for you. I mean, you can have AI do the work for you, and it's not going to be successful. AI is not thinking for you. It only knows what you share with it as well. I think that's something a lot of people miss. Like, if you don't share the accomplishments with it, if you don't share your values, your purpose with it, your motivations, the type of salary you want, it doesn't know any of this. It only knows the data it's working with. So unless you're a really public figure who has a lot of stories out there, or maybe a blog that it knows or something, it doesn't know any of that. So it's not going to know that. And I think that's a key thing that people forget, or maybe just don't realize, is it doesn't know all of this about you. You're a human and it can't download your brain. At least not yet. It's not able to download your brain. So until then, you have to give it data and information. So I would use it as a tool, but don't let it replace your human mind and your creativity.
I love that spell check on Microsoft Word. More like autocorrect, like mother ducker. He didn't. He didn't.
Yeah. And I think like it can be helpful, and like it's only going to, again, be able to spell check what you share and know. And I think some people rely on it too heavy. And then it's just using all the same data. AI, if you use ChatGPT to write your resume, everyone's resume is going to sound the same. But if you put really amazing data in there, I encourage people, maybe one bullet at a time on your resume. Can you help me rewrite this or make it sound better? But again, you have to put that great data in there and do the work.
It's some really great tips and strategies in here today. This has been a really great conversation, Kyle. I'll probably go on for like another hour like this. We are coming up pretty close to the time. Is there anything that you feel I should have asked but didn't ask, or anything we should have covered but didn't?
One thing I encourage people to do that can provide, and I guess now that we've talked about these definitions, maybe inspiration, is thinking to the future, like sitting in that future state. Okay, maybe you landed that job you really wanted, or maybe you completed the task, even if it's simple like that. I wrote my resume or updated it. Sit in that future state and then work backwards. Say, okay, I'm sitting here and I just finished my resume. How did this feel? How did I get here? What steps did I take to write this? And when I work with clients, I have one rule. They're not allowed to say, I don't know. So you have to sit in that present or that future state and say, how did I get here? And start writing it out and thinking about it. And that can unleash some creativity about like, oh, I used AI, or I asked a friend. Okay, how do you feel in that future state? And to start creating that future and then working backwards can be really powerful. I do this before big workshops or before we go on trips somewhere. A lot of times, and it can be powerful to actually start writing that out and then say, what steps do I need to take and work backwards to get there?
No, I like that. Really, really solid tip to end the show on. Just before we go, Kyle, what's the best way for our listeners to maybe reach out to you and potentially work with you, ask questions?
Yeah, my website, caffeinatedkyle.com. And then speaking of LinkedIn, I spent a lot of time there. So it's Kyle Elliott with 2 L's and 2 T's.
Excellent. Once again, to our listeners, don't worry about grabbing a pen and paper. We are going to have that in the show notes for you to make it easy. Kyle, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate your time and your insights here. And to all our listeners, again, thank you for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.